Okay, continuing on with our assembly, let's bring in another instance of our cube. Being Windows and being SolidWorks, there's at least 5 ways to do everything, probably 6 now. So next one would be to go over to our File Explorer, and because this was open, I can drag from the task pane into the geometry or into the assembly work area. Let's see, we did not use the plane, so I'm going to expand this out, and the first column over here on the view is that I can hide those objects. Right, so we did face-to-face coincident on all of the first 2 cubes. The first one was fixed. Second one came in and aligned to the faces. We can also use the planes. I showed that the front plane was aligned to the front plane. So if I select, hold down the control button, and select another front plane, I can make that coincident. So this time I'll do it with the pop-up context. So coincident. And you'll notice that it still kind of looks like left-clicking, holding down, and dragging. This can still move in a lot of directions. But what's really happening is, let's go Control 5, is we can move left to right, we can move up and down, but because of that coincident, we cannot move front to back. All right, so back, we'll go to Control 7, and I'll pick the top plane and hold down the control button to the top plane, make that coincident. And now I'm able to move left and right, not up and down, not back and forth. So the last constraint that we'll place is right plane to right plane. And now I have a fully defined object, a fully defined instance in my assembly. In effect, if I turn this back on, I now have 2 objects occupying the same space. In reality, we can't do that. So one of those is going to possibly be for another purpose. Normally we would not, that would not be a desirable result. So in this case, we can use the suppression states, and I will suppress that item so that we can see a visible object, a hidden object, and a suppressed object. And managing those will give us a lot of horsepower, a lot of working strategies to manage our assemblies. All right, so I want to bring in another instance. We did the insert components. We did a drag and drop from the File Explorer. If my Windows is open, and doesn't look like it is, so let's go over and find my object. And I'm going to reduce, minimize, and I can drag the assembly cube into the work area from the Windows Explorer. All right, so we've done coincident, just that first location. A lot of things are going to be coincident. We've done the face-to-face. We've done the planar. We can also do edges, but in our hierarchy, planes and faces are going to be first choice. Edges, if I select an edge, hold down the control button, select another edge, and make that coincident, they're going to align, but now I also have rotation. And if I'm trying to make an angle or do something along those lines, then that's going to be a desirable result. If I come over to another edge, and make those coincident, well, that will allow this to be to go fully defined. So I got the same basic result in two mates. That's still not going to be my preference. If I have a problem and I have to diagnose this, I'm more comfortable working with the faces than dealing with the edges. And then the last would be let's see, we brought that one in. The pull down insert component, existing part and assembly takes us back to the insert component. We'll drag one more in. And the last would be to select the vertices or the endpoints. So if I make an endpoint coincident, it has the ability to fully orbit the geometry. So I could pick endpoint and go coincident. Now I have the same effect as the edge. Maybe not moving back and forth because of the constraint to the front side. And then to the missed that one, vertex to vertex. All right, so my filters are not on. And at some point I would like to have my filters. So if I hit F5, and they did not show up for once, so let's see. There they go. When we do F5, I have the filters across the bottom. And if I'm having trouble making selections in the assembly to perform the mates, I can default to filter faces by hitting the X on the keyboard or clicking on the icon. Surface bodies, solid bodies, axes, just planes, sketch points, the sketches, segments, midpoints, center marks. Okay, some of these are going to be for the drawing. Trying to think what my other, okay, and then the vertices. All right, so if the little funnel over here is lit up and my icon goes to a funnel, then I'm just selecting those items. All right, so we brought the one in, we inserted, and then from the work area, if I hold down the control button and left click on an object and drag it in, I'm also bringing in another instance of that part. All right, so we'll stack those up, coincident, and then we'll start to take a look at what happens when we make things parallel. All right, so if I move this around, it's still in contact with that top block, able to move front to back and side to side, but no longer up and down. And I'm not able to rotate in two of the axes, but if I come over to my move component or rotate component and grab that block, it's still going to have the ability to rotate. And then you might notice that all of my origins are lined up in the same, and as I rotate, the origin of that block is rotating with the instance that I'm moving, that I'm manipulating. All right, so let's go with a parallel. And the parallel is going to stop the rotation. So if I try to rotate this component, well, it can kind of move, but the rotation about the face, that's not happening anymore. So let's go with the other. Perpendicular is going to put us into an over-defining condition. The selected mate cannot successfully be created, basically because we already have a parallel. This face and this face could be parallel. This face and this face could be perpendicular, but it's already there. So in my selections, perpendicular doesn't get used too much. Lock, we haven't really gotten into a situation with fixed in the sketches, but locked and fixed are not my favorites, and you won't see me use them very much, if at all. All right, so I'm going to go with my standbys of face-to-face and coincident, and this parallel is going to allow me to move this block back and forth, which if this is a dynamic assembly, that's going to be a desired result. Okay, so one of the things we can work from is if I right-click and open, that will open up that component in the part module. Also, since it is already open, if I go to the window and select it out of the window pull down, now I'm back into the part ready to sketch or create geometry. Because of the associativity of the software, if I create new geometry. So that one worked. I think I let go of the control button before I did the mouse button. And we're going to extrude cut and go through all. And I've added a through bore. And then we go to Window and Assembly. There's also the Control tab. So now you notice that all of the parts ended up with a hole, even the one that's suppressed when we go back and unsuppress it. All right, so anytime we have the cylindrical geometry, we now have the ability to go with concentricity and also tangency. It just depends on the geometry that we've selected. So tangency would be like a face and the cylinder, a planar face and a cylinder. And I'll probably end up going back and deleting, so automatically defaulted to tangent. We'll get out of that. So the last two mates, here's the list of all of the mates that we've applied, even the ones that are suppressed from the third instance. And let's go back one. And I have the parallel and coincident. I'll leave the first coincidence. And if I suppress those, I can kind of keep track of my what-if scenario. Maybe that's what I want. Maybe I will come back and decide that those aren't useful and end up deleting them. All right, so now we are able to rotate because of the tangency. That face is always going to stay in contact with the cylinder. And then if I was to release the parallel, and it would still be able to move, but not necessarily have the rotation in the assembly. And then unsuppressing the coincident, well, that doesn't really affect anything. So let's go ahead and control select those and we'll suppress. Going from cylinder to cylinder and going tangent is going to allow rotation and movement, kind of an elliptoid movement around the stationary cylinder. And then finally, what we will use the most of will probably be concentricity. Concentricity then is going to just allow rotation around that axis. Okay, so going back to something like the parallel and unsuppressing it, I now have that fully defined. So the sixth instance becomes defined. There's no minus sign, there's no F, there's no overdefined. And maybe I go back and decide that I don't need instance 3. I will right click and delete, and it shows me the mate relations. There are shouldn't be any absorbed features other than the mates. And when I delete that, it is now no longer taking participating in the assembly. So I show the components. I think I have the two objects occupying the same space thing going on again because of the hide. So let's hide, show. All right, so you can create situations where this is going to get kind of confusing, so you have to keep a running track of the instances that you've brought in and kind of what they're doing. If I were to bring in another instance, then it's not going to go back and fill in number 3. It just keeps incrementing and goes to number 7, and then we'll continue on. All right, so we'll close out this basic intro with our view. So if I'm panning, if I'm moving around, I have that same kind of sense as if I'm moving the assembly. Everything is in location. Let me go ahead and bring another piece in, and the difference is is the origin of the assembly stationary and the part is moving around it? Or if I'm rotating, am I rotating the assembly, or am I rotating the component or the instance? So let's see if I hold down the control. Oh, that was the second. Got to watch out for the control. I brought in another one. And one of the reasons that I'm bringing in a single instance, a single component, and then fully defining it is getting all of the parts in here can get really confusing as to which ones, and you're having to deal with a lot of extra geometry. So one part at a time is usually better. The Alt. Let's see. Well, what I was looking for was the rotate. So in rotating the component, I'm seeing the origin move, whereas if I'm rotating the assembly with the middle mouse button or with my icon, I'm seeing everything move. So there's a perceptual, there's always that perceptual, am I moving the component or am I moving the assembly? Am I moving the view or am I physically moving the parts? So since this isn't fully defined, I'm able to move it around the area. On the insert components, the rotate context toolbar, we'll do that real quick. If I click on the rotate about the X, or rotate about the Y, rotate about the Z, it's allowing this to move in increments that we're setting. And it can be kind of handy to have that pop up and set our geometry in the location. So by rotating it 3 times, I pretty much brought it back, except notice that my origin is not pointed the same way as the other origins. All right, so at some point, the origins are going to get a little bit annoying, having all those little blue dots. And at that point, we'll come over, turn the origins off, and be able to identify which components are mated, fully defined, and which ones are still free to move. So for our degrees of freedom, so the one I was looking for, there we go. So when we talk about the 6 degrees of freedom, we have movement of our components along each of the axes, positive and negative, positive, negative, positive, negative, and then rotation about each of these axes to give us our dynamic movement within the assembly.